Hi, this is Dina for Splitcoaststampers. I'm going to be working with this Sakura Clear Glaze Gel Pen today. I have a Japanese version which is marketed as Aqualip, and it is the same ink as the Clear Glaze Gel Pen that you'll find online. The pen comes with a little stopper on the end. You just pop that off and the ink will flow pretty readily. This is a clear gel pen that dries with a slightly glossy raised finish. So that's nice for adding small bits of gloss to a colored image, and you may have used it that way before. Here you can see how the ink comes out of the pen. It's a very nice flow. This ink also dries waterproof, so it can be used like a permanent masking fluid with wet media, and that's what I'll be showing you today. I have another pen that I've had for a little while and it's been sitting, and sometimes ink will get stuck around the ball, but if you tap the pen down a few times, it will usually start rolling again. I'm going to be working with hybrid ink today, and hybrid ink is great because it's permanent with watercolor and alcohol inks, and I want to demonstrate both of those mediums here today. If you don't have a hybrid ink pad, that's fine. Just make sure that the ink that you use is compatible with your coloring medium and you'll be fine. This stamp image is from Whimsy Stamps, and I completely forgot that I had it, and it's perfect for this technique because it has a lot of sections and fine details. My ink pad is a little bit in need of re-inking, so I'm doing a second impression here to fill in where it's a little bit light. I'm going to start off by covering a few areas of the image with the glaze pen, and these are the areas that I want to remain white when I'm done coloring my image. This ink dries quickly enough that it's going to start drying as you're working, so you want to work slow enough to keep a good flow, but also quick enough that you can keep the ink wet on your leading edge. You probably won't be able to go back and fix areas that you missed with this first coat, so be sure to keep your back and forth strokes close together so you don't leave any gaps. And you'll also want to keep the ink moving and wet on your leading edge. I like to move in small sections, moving back and forth from one end to the other. Any gaps in your glaze will allow color in, just like any other masking fluid. You can go back and add more layers after the glaze is completely dry, but you won't be able to go back and fix a spot until then. So I've glazed over the frame there. I want to keep that white. There's also a towel on the chair that I'll cover up. And then the sails on the boat. And then I'm going to glaze the edges of some of these waves that are coming in. And I'll let that glaze dry completely before I move on to the next step. Actually, while that's drying, I can work on some other areas that don't have masking. I've got this driftwood that I want to add a layer of light color to first, and then the umbrella and the seagull. And I'm using Copic markers here. Copics are nice for base colors and smaller areas, and they dry quickly so I don't have to wait to add layers in. I want to maintain that lightest color as my highlight color, so I'm going to go in with the glaze pen over my coloring and add a few little highlights and wood grain lines. And while that's drying, I'm going to jump over to the umbrella and do the same thing. I'll lay in the lightest color. And then use the glaze pen to add a little design and texture to each section of the umbrella. And when I add the darker layers in, the glaze will preserve the lightest color. I just added a little color to the seagull's wings and tail, and he's done. So I'm going to use the glaze pen to cover him completely. And then when I'm ready to do the sky, he'll already be dried and masked and ready to go. Now I'll go back in with my darker colors to finish up the driftwood, and I can color right over those glazed areas to do that. With alcohol inks, the color will stick to the glaze, but you can use a colorless blender pen to lift that color off once you're done with your other coloring. Back over to the umbrella and I'll do the same thing. Add in my medium and dark colors, and you can see where the glaze is resisting the additional layers of color and preserving that lightest color underneath. Next, I'm going to color the chair, and you can see that I don't need to be careful around the edges of the towel where I glazed it before. I'm done there, so I'll go back with a blender pen and clean up any alcohol ink that stuck to the glaze. I colored and glazed the sun, and now I'm going over the grass with a colored pencil just for a little finer detail. And then I'm going to use that older glaze pen that I showed at the beginning to glaze the grass just because it's giving me a finer line. The new pen that I was using has a really juicy flow, and I don't want that here just because these grass lines are so fine. I'm not being super perfect in this section, which is fine. It's just grass. And if I miss, it will just add more texture to that area later when I watercolor over it, and I want that. I am ready now to do the background. So I'm going to use the glaze pen this time to mask all the coloring that I've done so far. I've done the goal already, so I'm going to cover the umbrella, the chair, and the driftwood, and then I'll let that dry. I pulled out my Corine markers to do some palette blending for the sky. I've got a little bit of blue that I scribbled onto an acrylic block, and I've got a small paintbrush and some water here. I'm looking at the artwork of this stamp for cues to where to place my color, and I can go right over the images that I've masked with the glaze pen, which is really nice for a continuous look in the clouds and in the water here. For water media, I can just use a paper towel to lift any color that's stuck to the glaze. It's very easy. You can also use a blender pen if you've got an old Stampin' Up! Blender pen or a Dove blender, or you can use a wet cotton swab if you have a smaller area to lift. I'm going to keep adding darker areas into my wet area here in the water until I get the look that I want. The waves will cast a shadow right underneath them, so I want it a little bit darker there. For this sand, I switched over to watercolor for some more intense color. These are core watercolors, and they are my favorites. I'm following the same process here, just covering the area with a lighter color and adding shading where it's needed. You can see that I'm painting right over the chair and other areas that are masked with the glaze pen, which is so nice for color continuity, especially in a sort of broad area like this. I'll just keep layering my colors, adding darker and more concentrated colors as my area dries. I've got a shadow under the driftwood there and also under the chair. So just keep building until I'm done. That is it for my process here. I twisted a damp paper towel into a point, and I will clean up any stray watercolor with that. And here is my finished card. I just added a sentiment in the corner, die cut the panel, and layered it onto some patterned cardstock. At this angle, you can see where all the glazed areas are, so that's kind of cool. I'll have a few more samples in the gallery using the glaze pen, and I hope you'll take a look there for inspiration. And I thank you so much for watching.